Live from Salt Lake City, this is Heart of the Matter 2.0. I'm Shawn McCraney, your host, and it is June 12th, 2018. Tonight we have part 2 with Erik, Jerde, and near-death experiences. Part 1 was great. Part 2 is even better. I really was enthused after we were able to talk, and you're going to watch that in just a second. But we have a little tutorial from Michael in Sweden, who is going to show us something about our website and all the podcasts which are available through HOTM.faith. Take a look at that right now.
All right, we're excited to show you the HOTM Podcast Archives page. Simply go to HOTM.tv, select in the menu Podcasts. Once you're there, you're going to have 4 different choices. Currently, we have HOTM 2.0 Christianity, which is the current ongoing show with Shawn McCraney, our host, our pastor, our friend. We have HOTM 1.1 Evangelical, which is a previous HOTM series. HOTM 1.0 Mormonism, which we all know Mormonism just ain't the same. Then we have ChristiAnarchyToday, which is an ongoing show. All you have to do once you're here, click on one of the buttons. So I'll click ChristiAnarchy Today. That'll take me to that particular show's podcast playlist player. And this particular show, since it's an ongoing show, you're going to see the latest episode at the top. If you want to go back to previous shows, you just go down and you can see which episode you'd like to choose. The additional thing here is if you go up to, for example, HOTM 1.0 Mormonism, what you're going to see in this playlist is that it starts from episode 1. The reason why it's a reverse order here, both there and in Evangelical, is because those shows are finished. There's no more additional shows added to them. So you have the ability to scroll through here, go to any previous episodes you would like to watch, and same thing with Mormonism and so on. So it's pretty simple to navigate. One thing you can also do is scroll down to the bottom of the page, and you can download the free Spreaker Podcast App. This is both for an iPhone or an Android. You click on one of the two options. Once you've downloaded that, all you have to do is search for HOTM to pull up all the shows that we have hosted there. In addition to these podcasts, we have the audiobook Knife to a Gunfight. Any additional audiobooks will also be placed up there. Campus Meat and Milk are also coming to there soon. I hope you can take the time to listen to the podcasts. They're really great when you don't have the time to sit and watch an actual YouTube video, to just sit in the background and listen to the podcast as you're doing additional work. So I suggest to try it out, start playing them, enjoy them. Also, don't forget to share and recommend to all your friends and family. Thank you.
Go ahead. We are back with Erik and Jerde of Near-Death Experience, and talking about near-death experiences last week. Phenomenal, interesting, insightful, touching, and really something to look at and give some consideration to, especially with the vast amount of material that Erik has mentioned and referencing throughout. You can also go to his Facebook page. It's a private page. He has to accept you, or one of his administrators have to accept you. But the way they get to it, Erik, is...
It's a closed group, it's called on Facebook. Group. It's called Jesus and the Near-Death Experience.
Jesus and the Near-Death Experience on Facebook, and they just do whatever you do on that thing, and you'll decide.
We try to make it very user-friendly. So we don't post too much as admins. We want to let the people on there post. We can pray for people. People that are NDEs can share them. They have questions. It's anything related that's kind of Jesus, Christianity, near-death experiences. Bring it in. Come on in.
How do you decide who you'll let in and who you don't?
We usually let most people in, but we like to kind of check people out to make sure, because there's a lot of fake accounts and there's a lot of people who want to spam.
Oh, okay.
But most people will let in, give them a fair shake.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so last week we left off a lot of talk about a lot of things, a lot with Erik's life up to the point where he was investigating near-death experiences, and then he shared some really interesting things about spirits and what's around us that's invisible in relation to near-death experiences, and how near-death experiences benefit us in the faith, how they help us get perspective. Very informative, and I have found this just fascinating. But we may get into something now, and we're going to continue on to talk about near-death experiences in this hour, but I want to know about premortal life.
Premortal life, yeah.
Pre-existence.
Pre-existence. Well, that is that's heavy duty, Shawn. From my research into near-death experiences, I have to conclude personally that we have some existence before coming to earth. Okay. Even in the scriptures, it says, "Before you were born, I knew you." God.
Jeremiah 1:5.
Jeremiah 1:5. God knew us. I don't think we've existed from eternity, other than an abstract way that we're all part of God, right? Because God is our Father. But as a distinct soul, I think we have existed before coming to earth, but just not for eternity. Okay. I don't know how. I can only go by what I've read, information that people who've died to come back have said, by reading of the scripture. I think it's important to realize that heaven and earth work on different time scales. Earth is linear, so everything is dilated, right? Heaven is vertical. And if you read the Greek New Testament, it says age during. Mm-hmm. Well, what is age during, right? It doesn't say eternal, but eternity is in an instant. So it's not linear. Okay. We see things as a time dilation. 1 hour, we can feel the passage of time. Eternity, everything is happening at once right now. Mm-hmm. It's this way, earth way is this way. So as far as our souls are concerned, our existence began at some time in the vertical. Okay. And so a lot of people who have had near-death experiences, they die, they go up to heaven, and they meet people that they know, but they don't know them. It's like, I know you, I love you. It's like they've had a reunion, like Mary Neal did.
Mary Neal, yeah.
She, incredible NDE.
And she believes in pre-existence.
I think to some point, yes.
Okay.
I don't know the extent of her thought on she doesn't really delve into it too deeply that I've read. But she said in her NDE, she was greeted by some people, she didn't even know who they were, but she knew them better than she knew people on earth. It was the weirdest thing. And when she actually died and crossed the veil and was over in heaven, she said that they were so happy. Like, they were dancing, they were so joyous. It was like, we're back, how's it going? It's like, hey, Shawn, where have you been, man? You know? And it was just like a wonderful reunion. There was so much happiness, so much joy. And so I think we were formed and we existed before we came to earth, and maybe this is going to sound partially LDS, even had maybe a say in our trials on earth to help us grow. I just don't know the extent of it, because heavenly time and events, and this don't translate to earth, so I can't really explain it. Okay. Like I said, I don't think we existed for eternity, right, other than in an abstract way we come from God, right? We're His children. I just don't know. I don't know at what point the soul is like created and then comes to earth. But I have to say, we had some existence, we had some identity before being born. I don't think it was like we were born and then here's our soul, here's our personality, here's everything.
And you get that from the study of near-death experiences, right, in addition to your own personal opinion and some passages in Scripture. There's some passages in the book of Psalms that talk about it. In the New Testament that make some allusions to it. It's not too deep. You have to kind of like be able to, because the Bible in a way is a big parable. You got to really spiritually understand things in a way. But I try to take it all. Okay. I try to see the big picture and kind of put it all together. But I see him as harmonious with the Bible. Okay. I'm not a full pre-existence guy like the LDS churches by any means. Who are these children coming down?
Right, and the eternal regression. Yeah. But I do believe that God forms us, that God loves us, that we know our family and some of our friends, and we build relationships. and then we come down to earth.
So let me just say a couple things, because this is so anathema to so many Christians. One, could you possibly concede or admit that before I formed thee in the belly, I knew you, that perhaps our pre-mortal existence was in the mind of God, that the spiritual mind of God had us, and we had familiarity with other thoughts and mind of God before coming here, rather than the anthropomorphic cutout picture of spirits that are waiting together in a park up there. That, hey, it's your turn to come down, Jane. All right, it could be something as far-reaching as that.
It's possible. I'm not going to deny it. It's possible. But we don't just see. The thing is because when an NDE dies, they see their body, but it's like a spirit. It's translucent most of the time. You know what I mean? So it's energy. That doesn't mean that that's how we know it before we came to Earth.
Right.
Because we just know that in the NDE because we were anthropomorphic on Earth.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and it's also possible when it says, I knew you, to me it kind of intimates that he in order to know us, we had to be distinct in a way too. Mm-hmm. So it could be, it's more than just a thought in God's mind that this is going to be a soul I'm going to create. It could be, I knew you like your parent knows your 5-year-old son.
Yeah. Well, in the first show, you mentioned that he is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Yeah. And so the way a Christian would explain Jeremiah 1:5 would say, he knows everything before he does it. So that's what he's talking about there to the prophet Jeremiah. Right. Let me give you a little pushback from a biblical perspective.
Absolutely.
Jesus said, I am from above, you are from beneath. So he seems to say, I'm the only one that came down from heaven, and the only one who goes back to heaven like this is going to be me, because only ones who come down from heaven go back to heaven, and he was speaking of himself. The second thing that I think of is Paul, he says that which is spiritual is not first. He says that which is carnal or material is first, and that which is spiritual is second, meaning we were born carnal creatures and we become spiritual creatures by rebirth. And the third thing I would just throw in for you to consider is that the typical, which doesn't matter, traditional Christian view is that God formed Adam out of the clay. He breathed into him the breath of life, and Adam then became a living soul, mind, will, and emotion, suke in the Greek. And then when Eve was taken from his side, she had a mind, will, and emotion formed from the clay of Adam. And those two, as they procreated, sent that spirit God blew into them, and that is what generated life. And there's just the continuation of God's breath. There's no more of earlier spirits coming down. Right. That's how the Christians are. Right. I realize that's not your view, but I just wanted to share that's how a Christian would see it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, and also in the Bible, though, it says, who is man that you were mindful of him? You made him a little lower than the angels.
Right. Well, and, I think that...
And actually, the Greek, I think, has made him a little lower than God. If you read the Greek translation.
I'd have to see that.
The Young's literal is, who is man that you were mindful of him, that you made him a little lower than... I think it's God.
Is it? I'd have to,
but the NLT says angels. Either way, we're still spiritual beings. You know what I'm saying? You're still a child of God. Now, as regarding what Paul is saying, it could be the context he's talking about is from the point of view is where we're at on earth. Okay. Not necessarily this is our divine right. Okay. This is where we are. Our physical is first on earth.
Got it.
I don't know. I'd have to read the before and after because I like to have context, like you say. Yeah. That's possible. And then our spiritual is second, because when we're on earth, we're carnal automatically. Right. We're physical. We have physical. We're not physical, but we have physical bodies. We have all the carnal desires, lust and hunger and envy and all that. And then maybe that's what he's talking about. Maybe he's saying, if you're on earth, the first thing you are is your dominant tendency is going to be towards the earthly part.
Could be.
Your spiritual, maybe your second. Maybe that's what you have to bring into the become first, which is why there's all this redemption through Christ to get back in touch with your original spiritual self. I don't know. I'd have to do more research.
We'll talk again.
What you could say is, could very well be true. I mean, wherever truth is, that's where I go.
It doesn't throw your...
No. Yeah. Because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And in the
so
bigger
it's
picture.
not intrinsic to a near-death experience to have a belief in a potential.
No, and you know what? If there is no near-death experience, it could be the familiarity is, like you said, they were all in the mind of God. There's familiarity there. I mean, I'll readily concede that. It's not a hill to die on for me.
Yeah.
There is some, but I do think we do know each other in some capacity, or else there would be no familiarity with souls when people die and come back. There has to be something there. There's something, maybe we can't explain it under the full ramifications of it. I think when God gives NDEs, he gives us just enough because he knows that's going to impact that person's life and they're going to tell other people. And so being infinite, he knows how this is going to splinter out. And so the information that is given is what he thinks is appropriate. In regard to the Adam and Eve thing, when God breathed into Adam, he's breathing into life into Adam and Eve, right? He's breathing the life into them, and that could just be breathing into physical life. He may not be even addressing their spiritual.
He may not.
You know, the spirits are there. He may be saying, "I'm breathing. I'm making your heart beat. I'm starting to go, and I'm God. I give life."
Right.
I don't know if that's addressing their personal spirits. I don't know.
Right.
And maybe it is.
Well, the Hebrew thought, if I understand it right, is that his breath, which is giving him life, mixes somehow or animates the clay, and then he became a living suke, mind, will, emotion. That's the spirit of a man that goes back to God who gave it. So there's another one for you on your side. People will say, you go back to God who gave it. So the Genesis count is interesting. Just as a side note, in the book of Enoch, I don't know if you've read that. No, I haven't read it.
It's fascinating. I highly recommend it. It should be in the Bible.
It's very popular.
A lot of it I think is allegory. But did you know that Enoch mentions the one that tempted Eve is Gadriel, one of the 5 Satans. It's not. It's an angel named Gadriel who tempted Eve. Now remember, the book of Enoch, they think is written around 400 BC-ish. So this is a very old book. So, there's so much in the Bible. We talk about the Bible. It's just amazing because you'll hear one thing and you get another thing. And so we hear, people say Satan or Lucifer, and now we're reading it's Gadriel, who was an angel, like one of the Watchers. A lot of it is very. I want to talk about the Bible a little bit here. It's a fascinating book. It's the greatest book ever written. And I agree with you. I'm sola spiritus. I'm not sola scriptura. But I think it's a conglomeration of so many things. It's history, it's genealogy, it's poetry, it's personal witness, it's revelation, it's music. I mean, the Bible it's not a cookie cutter book.
Right.
It's a conglomeration of like a whole bunch of papers and different things. Like if someone grabbed a book of poetry, history book, genealogy, a letter to you, a bill, and they've smashed them all together, right?
Absolutely.
And so we're still trying to figure it out. And I think the reason that the Bible was formed and back in antiquity is it couldn't happen nowadays. It has to be back before the modern amenities would tear it apart, or when the spirit couldn't flourish that way, right?
Love it. I really want to know, because I've heard Book of Enoch so many times in the past couple of years, recommended to me, things like that, but do you know why it wasn't included? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
I'm sure it has a lot of great information, but why was it excluded? The Jews, they I don't think they were real prejudiced against anything. They thought so. What was it about Enoch that they said no?
I'm not certain why it was omitted. I don't know if it was by the Jews who were putting the Talmud and all that together, or if it was early Christians. I don't know.
The Tanakh was pretty well established by the Jews prior to the intertestamentary period. So
yeah, I just don't know, Shawn.
Oh, okay.
But if you ever look at the Apocrypha, New and Old Testament, it is huge. I have all the books, and it's this thick and it's small type.
Yeah.
And some of these books are older than some of the books that are in the Bible now, but they're omitted.
Yeah.
Same thing with New Testament writings. Like some of those should be in there.
Yeah, and the Catholics would agree with you.
Yeah, and the Catholics have a lot of the Apocrypha in there.
Sure.
To their benefit,
Yeah. Okay, so talking with you just on that point alone, if we were putting things on a continuum of, you would be considered very mystical or somewhat mystical in your Christianity, because you are bringing in things of the Spirit, Book of Enoch, books that are in the Apocrypha that you think have value, versus a very conservative Sola Scriptura, no, it's
Right.
these 66 books,
Right.
and don't you darn.
Right.
I mean, you're citing the Bible, and you're citing the YLT, and you're citing or Young's literal translation.
I love Young's literal.
Yeah.
If you want to get accuracy, it's not beautiful, like NLT.
Yeah.
But if you want accuracy,
Yeah, I love Young's too. Okay, so before we get into some specific stories that you're going to help answer, and I'm sure you'll weave them into these questions. You have decided to focus on near-death experiences Christians have.
primarily, yeah.
Primarily.
Yeah.
Let's just step back and look at the grand panoply of near-death experiences. I did a little reading because I was in preparation for you to come, and I saw some expert, I'm sorry I can't remember his name, and he spends his life studying it, and he says that they are also related to culture. That if you're of the African culture, your near-death experiences will be different than someone from downtown Salt Lake.
Mm-hmm.
So, and talk to us about the variables first.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Religious variables, cultural variables, race variables, gender variables, age variables. How do they play in? Do children have them and see playgrounds? Mm-hmm. Do adults have them and see something different? I mean,
Right.
how do the variables play in?
Variables do play into the near-death experience, absolutely. And here's the reason why. When we come to Earth, we're in a very solid, place. These are very solid. I can't really see your spirit. I can't see the angels that may be near us in the spirit. It's very material. And so that's how we process information. That's how we understand things. What happens when people die or have a near-death experience, I should say, is God is going to speak to you because he's not just going to be like, here I am, here's Jesus, here we go. Yeah. He's going to speak to you where you can understand maybe where you've been raised, your culture.
Sounds like a loving God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's going to come to you where you know. Eternity, like I said, it's forever. So we can get to the, this is how it all, really looks. But, heaven, God, the way he approaches you when you die, when people have near-death experiences, is he'll come to people what they know, what they're familiar with, what is maybe in their culture. And that speaks to their heart. So it gives them comfort. So they're not afraid or they're not shocked or like, whoa, what's going on? So there'll be a lot of times near-death experiences may be predicated on culture. But I got to tell you, a lot of it is still across the board. Yeah. You'll have a lot of the same core elements.
What are those core elements?
There'll be a lot of times there's a dark tunnel going towards a point of light. Okay. There'll be then at a point of light either they'll be greeted by an angel or a loved one, or some other being. Life review a lot of times.
By the way, the loved one, does that happen a lot in the Christian side?
Yeah.
Okay.
It happens on all sides.
All sides.
It'll be a deceased relative. Sometimes it's the most random person, like your great uncle.
Wow.
Like, why not if someone's parent, why not my dad? It'll be like, my great uncle was there on the other side and took me around. I can't explain why. God knows why. There's a reason for all this. But so there's a lot of core elements that are the same.
So tunnel, relative, angel.
Angels, and not all of these will all mix, but a lot of these core elements will be the same. They'll life review. They'll go through beautiful landscapes a lot of time. Now, if you imagine having 20/10 vision, and perfect hearing, and your senses were all nines here on Earth, like as good as a healthy person could be, you just take that and magnify it an infinite amount of times. That is your senses on heaven. I mean, it is literally heaven. I mean, it's beautiful. So they'll have the experience of heaven, of experiencing bliss. Also, there'll be a lot of times they'll travel to cities, or there'll be buildings that people go in, and there's business, there's things going on there. Or
Mary Neal described it being very busy.
Very busy, very busy. In fact, in her NDE, as you remember, there was a building in the distance, a dome building, and she's like, I've got to get to that building, because she knew if she got there, she wasn't going back. And they told her, they're like, you could stay or you can go back. And I remember she's like, I'll stay, thanks,
Yeah.
She's like, nah, it's okay.
Yeah. Tell, really quickly, who Mary Neal is. 2 minutes.
Mary Neal is a medical doctor. I think she's a spine surgeon. She works in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. She went on a kayaking trip in South America several years ago and got pinned under the water, deep under the water. And conservatively, they say she says she was under the water probably a minimum of 17 minutes. Conservatively. She had a huge near-death experience and wrote a book about it, and just wrote a book called The 7 Lessons of the Light or whatever. I read it. It's an incredible book. I highly recommend it. Wow. But it talks about her near-death experience in more detail. In fact, she mentions Jesus in a lot more detail in this near-death experience, her personal experience.
Now, the fact that the first book doesn't speak of Jesus as clearly as the second book, the cynics would say, like Joseph Smith's first vision accounts early didn't include the details later. You would ascribe that to...
She actually mentioned him briefly in the first book. She mentions him in this. She didn't, I believe, mention him in the first book for 2 reasons. One, it was a very highly personal experience. A lot of people who have seen Jesus on the other side, it's very, very highly personal, very special experience. And secondly, a lot of NDEers get scorned. You know what I mean? They get ridiculed from people. However, she has told the experience to family way before the book even came out, the first book. So it was already out there.
Okay.
She just wanted to hold it closer to her heart until it was time to. She
was kind of an indifferent Christian, wasn't she?
She was.
Yeah.
She was a Christian, but it was like, I went to church, I sang the hymns.
Yeah.
You know, I guess, yeah, there was an afterlife, but it wasn't like a really solid relationship with Jesus and understanding God's love for her and everything else.
We'll go back to her and where she's at now when we kind of wrap up our time together. But so let's go back to the core things, some of those things. What else are kind of universally shared? Is the looking down at the body?
Looking down at the body is huge. Many NDEers, when they leave their body through cardiac arrest or whatnot, will actually float up to the top of the room and look down at their bodies. And a lot of times they're indifferent. They're like, there's my dead body, Or it could be in a horrible condition and they'll be like, I don't really care. They're indifferent. They don't care because they're in their spiritual body. So they're not so concerned. It's almost like they're apathetic to the whole thing. Like, I'm glad I'm out of that thing, let me tell you.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
Like a rat-infested house.
Right.
Sell it.
Yeah.
I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. I have to tell you, my good friend Robert Osgood, he had 3 near-death experiences. I believe his first one he coded for a good 40 minutes plus. That means he's gone.
Coded means no heartbeat.
Yeah, he's gone.
Okay.
And he had his near-death experience. He saw Jesus. He saw Jesus Christ, and they were walking on this path, and there were butterflies all around. He said they were so beautiful, and he said Jesus is the most beautiful person you've ever seen in your life. You are absolutely in love with Jesus. I mean, we say we love Jesus here as Christians. You are so in love with Jesus there. His eyes were just beautiful. The color, they would change color. It was like he was a spiritual being, but he was so magnificent, and there was so much love coming from him. Anyways, they were walking, and there was butterflies, and he said that his family was praying for him when he was down there dead, and he heard the prayers. When he came out of his NDE, he recited back to them their prayers verbatim.
Wow.
Verbatim. And he saw it from heaven. He's looking down with Jesus. They were praying, and he heard it. And he recited their prayers verbatim, and they were like, what the? It was like, whoa.
Wow. So they weren't in the room praying, they were somewhere else praying?
They believed they were somewhere else praying. Wow. And he heard the prayers. And some of these prayers were in here. They're not verbalizing things.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. It's incredible. And so a lot of times when you just leave your body, you'll look down either at the accident or the CPR or whatever they're doing. They'll look at you. So a lot of times then you'll do that at first. You'll kind of just be there. And then either a light will come into the room you're at, or a light will manifest right here. And not all the time, but a lot of times they'll start going through a tunnel at super high rate of speed. Don't know what this tunnel is. It could be a wormhole. We don't know how the spiritual... I don't want to sound too science fiction.
Sure.
God does what he does, but a lot of times they go through this tunnel, and then they come out on the other side of this light, and then that's where they're in heaven. And I think this is probably the foyer of heaven for most people, right? You're not actually going in, you're in the foyer, so you're just getting the taste of it. And a lot of times these people come to the end of the tunnel, they'll be in heaven, there'll either be a meadow, many times it's a beautiful meadow. There's water that is alive. It's actually, like the water and the plants are singing back to you, and they're praising God. So everything is praising God while radiating love from each other, and everything's alive. So there's no decay there at all either, right? You think of like grass, well, underneath there's decay and rot, but everything is alive there. There's no death. Everything is perfectly alive. Everything has intelligence. Flowers have intelligence. The birds, everything is so magnificently alive.
So people have seen it in that great a detail.
Exactly. And your senses are super sharp and acute. And you're feeling the love for them, and you're loving them, and they're loving you, and then the love of God permeates everything. And there's no sun, but there's light everywhere, a light that we can't understand. And so these people are in these areas, and a lot of times this is when they'll meet loved ones or a relative or Jesus, as some of them do. And they'll tell them, they'll talk or they'll have the life of you, and then it eventually comes to the point, it's not your time. You got to go back. And some of them kick and scream, let me tell you, literally. Like there's an NDEer who was like trying to argue with God, like, I'm not going back. No. Have you seen Earth? It's like Compton. I'm not going back there. They're not having any of it. But God knows what He's doing. I got to tell you my good friend Robert Osgood. He always pulls out the hat trick, right? You think you're going in because a lot of times they'll be like, "I'll give you the choice. You can go ahead and go on in, or you can go back. It's up to you." And they're like, I guess I'll just keep going. And then God's like, "Okay, but can I just show you one more thing?" And it's like Columbo.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Oh, I got one more thing here for you.
Yeah.
So with my friend Robert, he was having his NDE and he was with Jesus and whatnot, and he saw his wife and daughter, and he said, that did it. He's like, I in my heart I knew I had to go back. God wanted me to be with them. I couldn't leave my family. And so ultimately the Christ that's in you from the Christ that lived and died for us wins, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, look, I've got it, that's such a strong force, especially when you're in heaven, it's just there. And so even though at first they kick and scream, it's like, I've got to go back. Others, they tell them, you've got to go back, and they're just suddenly back. It's just weird. It's kind of a continuum. Other times they give you a choice. Other times, 1 second they're talking to them and they say, so would you like to stay or go? And then as they're thinking, they're just back in their body. So maybe instinctually their heart made the decision to go back.
And obviously there are times when God doesn't show the picture of the surviving family and they're just gone to heaven for good.
Yeah, they're gone. And a lot of times they can't go back. They would go back, but the body shell is so badly damaged, it's like, we're done here. You know what I mean? Come on in. Good job. Thou good and faithful servant. You know what I mean? Come in and...
So how about the differences then within culture, gender, age, and religion?
This is a fascinating thing. Children NDEs are fascinating, and they really, really corroborate testimony of God. When children have NDEs, they're so close to an adult NDE. The elements are about the same. The angel, the light, the beautiful area. A lot of times they speak with loved ones that have passed on, but it's very similar to adult NDEs. They're virtually indistinguishable, other than some things that a child want to be able to understand, which is a history. They don't have a history, right? And so they have the same core elements. A study was done between children and adult NDEs, and they have those same core elements still.
Wow. By the way, what's really fascinating is that when Jesus says to the thief on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise, paradisio, and that was the view, which you said they often come into a beautiful garden, that was the view, ancient view of what paradise part of Sheol, which was still the separate part from God. There was the paradise and the prison part, but the Sheol was a garden, and it was even though it wasn't in God's presence yet. So that's interesting that that's included in a lot of people's NDEs.
Right, and it's something to bear in mind with the near-death experience is that you have to liken it to, there's that old, they kind of use it for other things, but let's say there's an elephant, and there's 6 blind people, and they're all touching different parts of the elephant. One's touching a tusk, one's touching the tail, one's touching the leg. They give you their descriptions based on what they're feeling, what they know. Yeah. But no one's not blind and looking back at the whole elephant, right?
Right. So using that analogy, which came from India, the idea I wonder about is, if God is truth, if Jesus is the way, truth, and life, if all roads don't lead to Him, would someone in India have an NDE? Do they involve Vishnu? And do they come back on this earth worshiping Vishnu?
I have yet to read about that.
Now, so are you telling me that doesn't exist?
I've not read an NDE like that.
So
I have read, there's a gentleman named Ravi Parti, I think is his name. He's a Hindu who had an NDE with Jesus in it. And
okay, so so you're not saying they don't exist, but you're saying I have never read a Mohammedan NDE, a Vishnu, it's only God.
I have not read NDEs that have an explicit reference to Allah or Vishnu. I have heard of Muslims who've had NDEs that have seen Jesus. In fact, a gentleman, I forgot his name, I'm going to order his book. He was a Muslim, and a lot of Muslims know of Jesus, but he experienced Jesus and converted as soon as he came back to life. I think there are some NDEs out there that, from Hindus and Muslims, that couch what they're seeing in their terminology.
Yeah.
I just haven't read any that speak of seeing these specific spiritual people like Vishnu and these other Hindu gods or some of these other gods. It's either very generic or it's Christian.
Wow. I'd really be interested, but let's follow up later on that.
Yeah.
And we can talk in emails or texts. And if you are able to research someone who's done the research, so you don't have to, I would be curious to hear because that opens us up to the whole, I get God being merciful, and he doesn't take us from this life and throw us in the cold shower of his awesomeness. He brings us into what we understand.
Right.
I get all that.
Right.
But I would really be curious to know about those religious ties that carry over with people.
Yeah. And like I said, there will be some terminology and there'll be some imagery in near-death experiences that are relatable culturally. Yeah. So they may say things like afterlife that's similar to being Muslim.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of NDEs you can corroborate with Muslims that have died and been documented by a medical professional. It's hard to come by those. There's anecdotal. There's people that tell their stories. We can take them at face value.
Yeah.
It's just
but corroborated.
There's a lot of NDEs. I really like to focus on people that have documentation of being dead.
Okay. Let's talk about that since you've mentioned it. I wanted to ask you about, well, first, remember that one, but what about negative NDEs? I remember when I was on my Mormon mission, this dude went around, he was teaching in stake centers. Somehow he got a pass to do that. And he talked about NDEs, and he said, now in this one NDE, this guy, and his was the only one I've talked to, where he was screaming in fear, and he came back to life, and his job was a evangelical preacher. And the Mormon guy told me this story, of course. And as a missionary, I thought, yeah. But what about those negative NDEs, percentage-wise, do you know?
Yeah, real quickly, the guy who became an evangelical preacher, there's a gentleman who's in our group who had a near-death experience, and he's referenced in one of the books I wrote, his near-death experience. He was a hellfire and damnation preacher. He came back the opposite.
Wow.
So it flipped.
Wow.
Totally flipped.
Nice.
He said, you can't even understand. You cannot. Coming back is. We'll talk about this later, but coming back is very hard to adapt for NDEers. It's you're such a total. Like I said, the linear versus vertical axis. As far as the difficult NDEs, they're there. Some people have difficult NDEs. You know. I can only say is that God is reaching this person in a way that's going to affect change to their benefit.
Got it.
I like Howard Strom says, I don't know the mind of God. I'm not going to discount them. They do happen. They're in a very large minority. There's not, compared to like the blissful ones, it's a very small minority, but they happen. And I can only say is that this is how God is reaching this person.
I see.
And it could be that God is reaching somebody else from this person's house NDE. So God is reaching somebody else who's not even had the NDE. They may be like, Joe Schmo works at 7-Eleven. He's reading a book about this guy's house NDE. And he's like, I got to stop doing drugs.
Sure.
I got to stop.
Sure. And
so this guy's life has changed. We don't know the effects, but for God's good will, which I believe is based on love and the best outcomes, these are happening to people, sometimes good people, but ultimately for His glory.
So just let me sidestep for just one small segment. Are you still watching Heart of the Matter on Tuesday nights, current?
Yeah.
And things we do? So your then view of God being love, Calvinism, where God says, I'm going to determine that most of the world is going to burn in hell forever. Arminianism that says God doesn't want that, but he can't do anything about it, so they're going to burn in hell forever. And verse reconciliationism, which we say is God is love and he has the victory and all will be reconciled to him into a heavenly place. Where do you stand on that spectrum?
Absolutely agree. God will reconcile everybody to him. We have to understand something about God. He's infinite. What does infinite mean? It means forever. It means eternal. Whatever we can understand of that concept, it's no ending. When you say God is love, you also have to say God is infinite love, right? Because the attribute of God is infinite. You can't have infinite love and have torture. It doesn't work.
Amen.
You can have correction.
Sure.
That's part of love, which is why people maybe have difficult NDEs. But you can't have infinite love and have torture forever.
Yeah. Right.
Jinx.
Boom. Owe me a Coke.
Psh. You know, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. God can't be schizophrenic. He can't be the God of love who created you. That's like you going to your kids and saying, you know what, I'm going to spank you forever since you stole that candy bar.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
At some point, one of the reasons why, other than God is love, is we're finite. We are extremely flawed people. For a Calvinist to put a demand on like an election on somebody through no fault of their own is so egregiously disgusting to me.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm sorry to my Calvinist brothers and sisters, but it is really a disservice, and it really is not helping God get into people's hearts, because it's putting fear in their hearts, and fear then causes people to do drugs or prostitution or to be angry with somebody or to be flippant, right? Even small personality things based on who they think God is going to affect the personality, how they interact with people.
Yeah. In some ways, I wish I was, independently wealthy, because I would love to fund a study of hardcore Calvinists who've had NDEs and see how they come back. Because I wonder if they would come back and say, no more.
That preacher I was telling you about.
That preacher, he was Calvinist?
I Baptist.
But
that's close.
Yeah.
But
he was hellfire. Yeah.
He told me he was hellfire and damnation, and he came back and he 180'd faster than you can. Yeah. I mean, it was like
fascinating.
Yeah. And here's the thing, Shawn. When people come back from these near-death experiences, you know what they come back? God is love. They come back and they love people. Don't care so much about money. Don't care about status. They don't really like watching TV. You know, they're all about like, what is God want me to do? You just become in love with God. And they come back with a message of love. Calvinism is a belief based so much on the literal interpretation of Scripture that is a interpretation of Scripture.
Calvin's
interpretation of Scripture, who was a French guy in the 1400s.
French lawyer.
A French lawyer. So a French lawyer in the 1400s got it all figured out.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's good to know. End of the discussion.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, criticisms. Start with the number one criticism of NDEs and throw in if it's Christian criticism or just medical or atheist criticism.
Yeah.
What are they?
There's a lot of them from the skeptical scientific community. Some say it's hypoxia, which is what? The brain the brain or the body is starved of oxygen. Okay. And so it starts a chain reaction in the body where it goes into kind of a survival mode, the brain, and it'll stimulate all the receptors and these things to fire. They have like a survivalist mode, so as the person's dying, it's not so traumatic. But on further examination, that's not necessarily the case, because there have been cases where people have had the NDE without full hypoxia, but they've been dead, but the oxygen is still there, it's just a theory. It can't be proven.
Mary Neal says, being a spinal surgeon, that she knew that after she was dead. I mean, her coming back to life stance is, I was dead. Scientifically, I was dead. There's no doubt about it. There was no firing off of receptors. There was no hypoxia. None of that stuff could have been possible. Now, you know, Osgood, was it 40 minutes he was out?
I think 40, 45 even. Dead.
Wow.
I mean, he was dead. And let me tell you something. There are so many like that. I mean, and here's the thing about NDE, Shawn. This is hyper reality. So I'm looking at you and you're looking at me and we're doing the show. This seems real to us. But the NDE life is like this. This is like a shadowy dream. compared to, I mean, it is super ultra real. That's why when people come back, they have a hard time readapting to earth life, because it's like coming back into a dream. When you're on the other side, it is super real. Super real. It's the most real thing in your life, and you were dead. But and a lot of these, but as far as the argument is concerned, you have all the naysayers. You have the hypoxia, or it's the brain being flooded by neurochemicals. Or
that's the life flashing before your eyes.
But you have guys like Vin Pan Lommel, who is a Danish cardiac surgeon, atheist, and he is a full believer now. He writes in defense of near-death experience. He goes, none of the scientific explanations can explain it. None.
Tell the audience his name again.
His name is it's I know it's
Vince
Van Pan Lommel.
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 Okay.
He's a cardiac surgeon from
Norway,
the Netherlands, I believe.
Okay.
But when you have people like Mary Neal, Eben Alexander, George Ritchie, these are medical doctors who have died and come back. Medical doctors, these are the most cynical of people usually, right? Yeah. They see the body is the physical organism, so they explain things, they couch things in terms of all the interactions and what's going on and whatnot. These people are coming back like, I'm sorry, but we're living. Yeah. And I'm trying to tell you that.
And it's kind of matter of fact the way they do it. They don't seem argumentative. They don't seem like, I can prove. They're just like, no, it's reality.
And I don't know if it ever will be able to be proved.
Right.
You can't. That's the thing about God and earth. He's got, you can't, I don't know if we can ever prove with finality. That would defeat the purpose. There's the chasm there for a reason. I think we can get sufficient evidence, but I don't know that we will ever get full proof. That's just not how it works.
Have we ever had someone who was hooked up to anything to test how dead they became, who had a near death?
Yeah. Wow. They've had people who've been flatlined brain and heart, completely dead.
Wow.
Completely dead. Wow. Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
And it's fascinating. I mean, they come back and they're just like, it blows them away. But these people are, a lot of these NDEs, and you could research these, they have them on YouTube, these people are dead bodies. As dead as you can be without final death. There's even accounts of people who've woken up in the morgue. Like they were putting them in you're gone, just log this one away, and they've woken up out of death. And the thing is like with Mary Neal and some of these others, there should be massive brain damage. And these people are coming back talking and walking, and they should be their gooses should be cooked.
Is that part of it, is that they come back and they've been healed?
Miraculous healings. Doctors can't explain it. In fact, my good friend Robert Osgood, Christ told him, Jesus told him, some of this is going to happen. I'll tell you what's going to happen. This is going to get better. All these things he said that would happen, and they have come to pass. And he has got actual medical documentation. Jesus said, that's not going to be an issue. You're going to be healed from that. And there was like that girl based on that book, I forgot what it was called, but she fell in a tree and it had a near-death experience, and she had a major health condition, and she got healed from it. A miraculous healing. The medical community can't explain these things.
Unfortunately, we have the charlatans who have, for instance, that boy.
Yeah.
And now he's come out. His dad was a preacher.
Right.
And he came out with a big story, sold a bunch of books. Are there any that come to mind that you say, or it's really unfortunate that they have proven or they've admitted it was like the boy? What was that book called? Do you remember?
I don't know.
Return to Heaven? Or?
There's two of them that sound really similar. There's one with Todd Burpo, but that one's real. That's called Heaven is for Real. And then there's another one, and I think people confuse the two.
I confuse them, yeah.
Yeah, they get it. But yeah, he did come out and admit it. It's sad. It's very sad. And
it's kind of like the charlatans in the faith.
Yeah.
You can have a real healing by God in your family, and you can have someone go up there slapping foreheads pretending to heal, and the real healing gets thrown under the bus.
Like Benny Hinn and these guys who are making a mockery. I'm sorry, but those guys, that's all charlatry to me.
Yeah.
It's fake. It's giving people false hope. It may make them feel better, but there are some people in there that are being less than honest, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is to read NDEs that can be verified to some extent medically.
Okay.
Ultimately, it's an act of faith. You have to take their word for it. Just like when we read the Bible, we read it by the Spirit.
How about the 20 Minutes in Hell thing? You know that book, 20 Minutes in Hell?
There are a couple like that, yeah. 20 minutes in hell, yeah. There's some theories on some of these hell ones. Some attribute it to drugs administered. Some of them, it's they weren't actually dead. There's other theories about it. And sometimes they're just taking artistic license. It's hard to know.
It's hard to know.
It's hard to know.
Because God could be using that again
Absolutely.
to do something else.
All you can do is what you do when you study the Bible. You have to read it from every angle. You have to weigh the evidence. Try to look into the heart. Pray about it. You may have to try to look for evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to have to do that with people, but sometimes, you got to do some digging. This guy could be a charlatan. Robert and I know personally of some people on Facebook who are lying about stuff like that, about NDEs, and they're doing a disservice. Or there's people who've had drug experiences that are saying these are NDEs, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're really kind of, they're muddying the waters.
Got it.
And that's,
And when I think about it, I think Jesus describes an NDE, and the reason I think this is because when Lazarus was in the tomb, he was in there for the solid 3 days, and he stinketh, he's dead, and yet he uses Lazarus' name as a personal pronoun in one of his parables. He says there was a rich man and there was a poor man named Lazarus. It's the only parable where he uses a proper noun name.
Right.
And he was poor and he had sores and he dies. And then the rich man dies. So I have always taught and believed that when Jesus gives that parable, that poor man was really Lazarus, and what he experienced when he died in that was in the grave for 3 days, and Jesus raised him out.
Yeah, absolutely.
He tells us what happened to him. He was in Abraham's bosom.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so he actually gives us an NDE.
Right. In fact, the very Jesus that told Lazarus to come out walked with my friend Robert. When you think about it.
Wow.
That's the same Jesus. If you wrap your head around it, the same Jesus who was on earth said, Lazarus, come out.
Yeah.
Because Jesus knew where he was. He when you're be absent from the body present with the Lord, he was out, but he pulled him out. I like to think that that's the same Jesus that walked with my friend Robert and was with Mary Neal. The same Jesus. This is the same. This is the same guy.
Yeah.
The same Savior who loves us all. And so it's fascinating. It's really fascinating to read the NDEs of people who've seen Jesus. It's just amazing, and it really builds your testimony. One of the reasons I started Jesus and the Near-Death Experience is I really want to reach the Christian community, because a lot of the NDE verse is a lot of New Age people, which is fine. People are at where they're at, but I really wanted to get a shot of the arm into the Christian community, saying, look at. There's people who see Jesus, and so much of what they bring back just about agape love and service, that's so biblical. It's all in the Bible, the New Testament. So Robert and I and Father Rod Walton and Peter Panagore, who's an NDE, who's also one of our admins, we were really trying to put that out there for Christians so they don't have to feel so afraid to accept it or embrace it without being scorned.
What is the great kickback from the Christian church body toward NDEs? Do they feel it's
not mentioned in the scripture? See, this is the thing with sola scriptura. But here, this is why your ministry is so important. If you don't look at scripture in context, you're looking at out of context, right? And so they're so focused on what one interpretation says, and if it's not mentioned, it can't be true, right? It's so narrow, and so it just limits. It limits how Jesus is trying to speak with us in our hearts by the Holy Spirit, because you can't really listen to the Holy Spirit if we're just reading the letter of the Word. The Holy Spirit's got to speak to people through their hearts. He was poured out on all flesh, still is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's the big thing, is if it's not in the Bible, or it doesn't mention it explicitly, it mentions it not explicitly.
Right.
I could find several verses. I don't know them off the top of my head because I'm not good at memorizing Bible verses, but it doesn't mention it explicitly, but in my opinion, it's mentioned throughout the Bible quite a bit. And it's really mentioned for the first time in great detail in the book of Daniel, is when you really hear about the afterlife. I think it's Daniel chapter 12 is the first place in the Bible that really talks about it. But it talks about it all the way in Genesis when it says God, when they're gathered up to his people.
Sure.
That's basically saying crossed over to go see, a family that have passed on. So it's mentioned all the way throughout the Bible, but the Christian community, they want it they want cookie cutter, kind of like and a lot of Mormonism, they want certainty. Everybody wants certainty because any little bit of ambiguity is scary to them.
Yeah.
You know.
I've always been interested in this since college, Erik. I was working at ZCMI in Provo, and a guy worked in the department next to me, and he went through the windshield of his car on the freeway and was out for quite a while, and he came back, and he confided in me one night that he had, and he said he was at Jesus. He just remembered, I remember him going up a spiral staircase and looking at Jesus' feet, and Jesus talking to him through his heart. And I want to ask you one thing about audible communications, if there's any spoken mouth words or if it's all in
the communication is telepathic.
All telepathic.
Yeah. There's usually not speaking with mouths. It's always, and it's not just telepathic. It is speaking heart to heart, spirit to spirit. It's like communicating on a level you can't even understand. It's a full communication.
Yeah. Anyway, this guy, he told me it was the love. He just talked the love. And then he said something. He goes, "Oh, I got to do a bunch of shit right now." And I, being a Mormon, said, "Oh, wait a minute. You had a near-death experience and saw Jesus, and you come back and you say shit?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "You don't get it at all." That's what he said. I'll never forget it. You don't get it at all.
No. That's fascinating that you were able to hear that story.
Yeah.
It probably planted a kernel in your heart.
That's why I'm talking to you.
A tiny mustard seed, yeah. I mean, you come back, you got to come back and you see the big picture. You're like, you don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff, you know what I mean? Or the big stuff, it's all. You see the big picture of life. Yeah. And the big picture is love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. You know, you don't worry about things before that would get you down, like meeting the deadline or the P's and Q's and this and that. It's not important in the big picture. It's your relationship with other people.
We're out of time. That was part 2. We're going to go one more hour after this. I got a lot coming, so join us next week here on Heart of the Matter. Thanks, Erik.
You betcha.